The US-China trade war has overshadowed all other issues at the G7 summit in Biarritz, France. After a weekend of intense feuding and tit-for-tat tariffs, US President Donald Trump has tried to calm things down. He says China has made contact with US officials and that both sides will soon return to the negotiating table.
Respect for the fact that China called, they want to make a deal. I have great respect. And I have great respect for President Xi. And I think we're going to have a deal because now we're dealing on proper terms. They understand and we understand. But that's a great thing that happened. And they want to get something done. Now, maybe it won't get done, but this is the first time I've seen them where they really do want to make a deal. And I think that's a very positive step.
Mr. Trump spoke after China's top trade negotiator took the edge off the soaring tensions. Liu He said earlier today that China was willing to solve the problem calmly, although the foreign ministry had harsher words for Mr. Trump.
我们希望美方能够尽快地回归理性，放弃错误做法，为双方在相互尊重、平等互利的基础上进行磋商，创造条件。
The G7 summit also saw a dramatic shift of focus last night when Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif had turned up unexpectedly. French President Emmanuel Macron had invited him on hopes of de-escalating tensions between Iran and the US.
But Mr. Zarif did not see Mr. Trump, who said he knew about the visit but felt it was not the right time for them to meet. Now, for more, let's cross over to Elena Casas in Biarritz, and she's in France. Elena, Mr. Trump seems to be extending an olive branch to China after his comments over the weekend. Is that the case, though?
Well, President Trump has contradicted himself at least 3 times on the China trade war since the beginning of this summit, starting out on Friday by saying he was having second thoughts about those new tariffs, then saying that actually maybe he wants to increase them, and now, as you say, saying that China had reached out to the US by phone. High-level officials had, he said, something that's been denied by China, and that they were going to make a good deal, that he felt they were close. So when the US president is changing his line on this so frequently, it's hard to know what to believe. But certainly the markets seem to be responding well to what's been described as an olive branch. And it does seem that the issue of trade tariffs has been less thorny and divisive at this summit than many were fearing. Of course, President Trump walked out of the last G7 in Canada last year and refused to sign a joint communiqué because he disagreed with conclusions on trade. The French President Emmanuel Macron has deliberately turned the agenda this year away from trade to try and avoid a similar dispute, and it does seem to have worked in the sense that enormous divisions on trade between the countries that are present here don't seem to have opened up over the course of this meeting.
Elena, another thing that Mr. Trump sort of mentioned was that there's been great unity among G7 leaders this year. Does that seem to be the case?
Well, as I was saying, there seems to be more consensus around than many were fearing before the summit started. The French presidency, before this started, was telling journalists they'd already planned not to issue any joint communiqué, as would usually be signed at these kinds of summits, because they had no confidence that the 7 leaders could be persuaded to sign up to anything. We have, though, had some joint announcements in the course of this morning. The 7 countries, for example, will be joining together to give $20 million in immediate support for the Amazon to help fight the forest fires going on there, which was a key priority for President Macron, who wanted to push it right up the agenda, along with the climate and biodiversity. And the US, along with the other 6 leaders, have also signed a joint pledge to protect biodiversity, even though President Trump wasn't actually present for most of that climate and biodiversity meeting. But the French president said that members of the US delegation were in the room and that the US has agreed to sign up. So for him, really, this is already a diplomatic victory that the 7 leaders will sign up to anything at all, even if it's fairly minor announcements like giving more funding and support to countries in the Amazon to fight forest fires.
So saying all that, we are waiting to hear from Mr. Macron and Mr. Trump in the next hour or so. Do you have any idea what we can expect from them?
Well, we're hearing that France and the US are reaching an agreement on a trade dispute that's been going on between those two countries. Of course, the US took offence at a French unilateral tax on social media giants, which was implemented this year, which is an attempt to get big US companies like Google and Facebook to pay a bigger share of their profits here in France as tax. Now, the US interpreted that as an attack on American companies, although actually the tax is aimed at all international firms working in France and not just American ones. But the US president, as you might remember, threatened to tax French wine. He threatened that again just before getting on a plane to come here on Friday in retaliation for that internet tax. Now, the French presidency is saying that the two countries have reached some sort of détente on this subject and that the US is no longer threatening to tax French wine. So we're waiting to hear what the details of that may be.
Well, thanks for that. Elena Casa speaking to us from the G7 summit in Biarritz, France.